Random thoughts. In this video, I'm going to read part of Douglas Jardine's book, The Mad Mullah. This is a book that was published in early 1920s, and this book is a sort of biography of Mohammed Abdullah Hassan, or Mad Mullah as the British used to call him. And Douglas Jardine was what was called, or he served as the Secretary to the Administration Somaliland 1916 to 1921. And he was, we can say technically, the second in command. And this is a very critical time during the colonization of Somaliland. Of course, Mohammed Abdullah Hassan, this is the time that the war, the Dervish war, was technically coming to an end, or was coming to an end. Now, in this part, he tells us about the nature of the people. Of course, we are still in the very first chapter of the book. And in this chapter, he's giving us the backdrop. He's giving us the history of the land, the people, the geography, and things like that, which I think are very important for us to understand what was happening, or who Mohammed Abdullah Hassan was, and the activities he was engaged in, and the conflict between him and the British. This is good information that he's giving us. Now, part of that backdrop information is giving us is explaining to us the habits and the character of the Somali people. And I found this to be very, very interesting. In particular, there is this part where he explains that the Somalis are these groups of people. They can change in the outward, but the inside, they remain to be the same people. And this is what I mean. He says, like, it is not like the other people who, when they go to another culture, they can easily change and become that, and they change inside and outside. He says the Somalis can change the outside, can fit whatever society they go and live in, but then in the end they are Somalis, and they will come back and they will become like nothing happened, like they never traveled. And this is what he says, and I'm going to read, and some of this is going to be very funny. Trust me. He says, enough has been said to show that the tribe is mainspring of the Somali existence, but there are many Somalis who forsake their tribes and leave their country to seek their fortunes abroad. So even in this time, in the early 20th century, there were many Somalis who left Somaliland, and we can say the larger Somali territory, and go outside, of course, to look for money or to try to build some wealth. It's not just now that that's happening. It used to happen. And he says, as traders in Eastern Africa or Aden, as miners in Australia or South Africa, or soldiers in the French or Italian colonial armies, or as seamen with headquarters at Port Said or Brute Street, Cardiff, they have been equally successful. So they move to all these places. They will go work in different professions. I found it interesting that they would go all the way to Australia to work there as miners and things like that. So the Somali people would move, go around the world to try to find opportunities, just like it is the case today. But there is a funny part to this, trust me. And he continues to say, but sooner or later they find their way back to their tribe with one ambition in life, namely to be once again the normal nomadic tribesman. So it did not matter where they went. They always had this dream of coming back, and they will come back. And when they come back, they become just like any other Somali, like they are not different. And he continues to say, it is no uncommon sight in Berbera to see Somali traveler return from abroad clad in stores suiting, a celluloid collar with a gadi tie and a patent leather boots, and with all the assurance of a man of the world. So he says it was common, you'll see a Somali man at Berbera or in Berbera just arrived from outside, maybe from Australia, maybe from the UK, maybe from Aden or wherever where they had gone, or South Africa where they had gone to, of course, work and make money. And you'll see them come and they are dressed like this, of course, 20th century, because that was 20th century kind of a guy, dressed in the Western style of clothing and looking neat in that. And then he continues to say, he will remain in the town for a few days, ostentatiously entertaining his fellow tribesmen and friends, just to show what a success he has made of his adventure, and then he will scornfully cast aside forever the appurtenances of modern civilization. So He has come to Berbera, maybe with a lot of money, and he will entertain friends and try to show them that I've been successful wherever he went. And then after a few days, he will take off the clothes that he came in, the Western style clothing. And he continued to say, possessing himself a tobe, spear, and sandals, he repairs to his tribe in the interior and incontinently invests his all in the inevitable camels. So he'll throw away the clothes, he'll get a tobe, which is a traditional Somali attire, and some sandals and a spear, and he goes back to his village or to his people, and he buys camels from the money he had made from wherever he had gone, and he starts living like any other normal Somalis. And Jardine, and he does explain this, found this to be very peculiar of the Somali people, because there are other people, whenever they left, maybe say Africa and went to Europe, they so easily fitted in, and they would never come back and fit into with their own people. Or even when they came back, they will always stand out. There are things they will not do that the other people will do. But for the Somalis, it was different. They just come and then they threw everything away, and it is as if they never left the land. And there is a very funny story about this. And this is what he says: there is surely no native race so absolutely immune against the demoralizing force of denationalization. Now, this word is a very interesting word that is used here, and I think the meaning of the word has changed over the years, because today denationalization basically means privatization, but in this time it actually meant like somebody dropping their cultural background and becoming, maybe you can say, a citizen of the globe, something of sorts. I was trying to do some research, and that's the conclusion I arrived at. Maybe that's not the conclusion you will arrive at, but that's what I understood it to mean in that context. The result is that the traveler in Somaliland never knows but what the most obvious jungly bushman may not be the one who has traveled far, and never in this connection will the other forget. So he says, when you go to Somaliland, because he's talking about Somaliland here, or the land of the Somali, you'll meet someone maybe in the rural, and sometimes you'll be so mistaken about their exposure to the world, because you've met them in the very rural parts of the land, and you might be mistaken to think they are not traveled. But remember, those guys who, when made money, came to Berbera, entertained friends, and then threw away the Western style of clothing and bought a tobe and a spear and sandals. Those guys, they will go and permanently live with their people. And now, if you are a traveler, you come into those neighborhoods, you meet them, and often because they've so fitted back in with their people, you might be mistaken about what they know. And this is what he's explaining. And he says, and never in this connection will the author forget a certain tribesman named Hamed. Now it gives us an example of somebody he met who went by the name Hamed. In the good cause of propaganda during the war, I was endeavoring to explain to Hamed the might of England and France and the glories of London and Paris. So he meets Hamed, and this during the wars, I guess. When he says the wars, it's the wars with Muhammad Abdullah Hassan, the Dervish wars. He meets Hamed, and he's trying to impress Hamed. He's trying to make him see how big and powerful Britain and Europeans are. And Hamed just listens. He continues to say, Hamed listened to my winged words for some time, then remarked that he knew all about it, and that his address in London was 14A Jamin Street. So Hamed listens, and Jardine assumes that Hamed is this guy who's never left his very rural location or home. And he's trying to impress him, telling him these things about how powerful England is, and the good things about London and Paris and things like that. Hamed listens, and then he says, I know all this. I've lived in London. In fact, I have an address there. And he gives him an address. And I found that to be very funny. And then he continues to say, subsequent inquiries elicited that he had been a miner in South Africa 20 years before, and had accompanied a mining magnate home to England, where he had stayed with him as a personal servant for a year or so. So it turns out Ahmed had traveled to South Africa to do mining, and while there he had met this rich British guy and he had become his servant, and that guy had taken him to England and he had stayed in England for some time. Ahmed made some money, came back home, threw away his Western clothes and bought camels and started living like everybody else. And now Jardine comes along and assumes Ahmed is this ignorant and a guy that is not exposed to the rest of the world or what is happening out there. I found that to be very interesting. Those are my random thoughts.